like that that have been digitally manipulated. But the idea is what are we communicating and how are we communicating? And we always prioritise a specific set of values. And I'm slightly worried about the idea that utility can only be manifest through economic value. That isn't actually true. I think there's a whole set of values which aren't monetised. And the fact that we live in a kind of political age where we believe everything can be given a kind of exchange value is very, very damaging. Tony Duke, the historian and philosopher who died last year, the first line in his book is, we know how much things cost, but we don't know what they're worth. And I think it's that as an issue we need to bring back into the centre of any of these debates. And I hope we don't reach a consensus. I hope we don't reach a kind of convenient programme of sound bites that we can put together and say we all agree. Because it's quite clear we're a very disparate collection of people and we all have our own beliefs and ideas. If there are certain things we can agree on, that's fine. But it's not, it shouldn't be seen that that's the kind of ultimate imperative.
No, I think it's been extremely interesting and it's been great to hear everybody's opinions. I think we just, selfishly, me and Paul wanted to be able to take some things forward from our exhibition to kind of, so everyone's always like, what are you going to do next? And we kind of would like to actually take some things forward and try and work on them and have the backing of a room full of people that, you know, think it's a good idea.
I think it's quite, I mean, this whole exhibition and this whole event wasn't a narcissistic attempt to do something. It was effectively a PR stunt to get people talking, to create a splash so that the ripples are the academics, the journalists who talk about this, which effectively or hopefully will make things happen. And I think we want to take something away from this, which isn't just a chit chat we've had, which is very nice and nice paper. It's something that actually happens and changes things.
Can I just make one final point? Robert and I were at a meeting at SCOSA on Friday, and we had a presentation from the Architects Student Network, and it's a kind of new network to replace our chaos. It is the student voice that is missing in so many kind of architecture and educational debates, and we really do need, for students and for young architects, to be much more vocal and much more politicised. I mean, that's why I'm really pleased to be at a kind of event like this, is because actually political questions are being discussed much more openly. And that's something that's been very lacking for the last 20, 25 years.
Yeah, so I could maybe sum up now. I've just been trying to mildly collate everything into points that we could maybe vote on. And I think in terms of like moving towards things that students could maybe do, things that practices could do, and things that schools could do, and then obviously RIBA. I've divided the suggestions into different categories. So maybe we could vote on, yeah, so I think the things, maybe we should start with RIBA and the ARB. And we've got, I can see here like four things that have been suggested. And if you maybe think about what you think is the most important thing that we ask them to do, because if we just take one thing rather than four. So, the first one suggested by Jeremy, I'd say, is the most controversial, and that's scrapping of the protection of the professional title of architect. And second one suggested here, I think by Robert Mull, for RIBA to strike off anyone who doesn't pay the minimum wage. The third is for RIBA to reconsider the curriculum and possibly have more of the Part 3 information available to Part 2 students, or taught as part of the Part 2 syllabus. And the fourth, yes, is as suggested by Paul McGrath, for the ARB to offer an alternative to the Part 3, the current Part 3. So those are the four things. So if you'd like to decide which one you'd like to vote for. And Paul, would you maybe take a show of hands?
Okay, we'll keep this simple because it's a big room full of people. Who thinks we should scrap the professional title of the architect? Okay, I don't think that's even 50% of the room. So obviously, I think one of the things that will come out of this debate is we can't go to a higher governmental policy kind of changing exercise unless we can decide amongst ourselves what we actually want. So,
although 20 people, I'd say, did vote for that.
Yeah, so I think what Nic said is quite a valid point.
So who thinks that the RIBA should strike off any practices that don't pay the minimum wage? You're only supposed to be voting once, guys. Oh, everyone was voting on that. Okay, well, or do you want to do it like that, or do you want to all just vote? Okay, sorry. You can vote on them all, and then the most votes, that'll be good enough stuff. Okay, so if you want to vote for this, then raise your hand. So RIBA to strike off.
Need to do the vote again.
I think the other one would have got more votes if more people realise you could vote on more than one.
Can you repeat the first one again?
Yeah.
Right, okay, sorry guys. Yeah, sorry. Okay, so number one, who thinks we should scrap the title, protection of the title of architect?
It's good, 73%.
Okay, that's some more. Okay, and who thinks that the RIBA should strike off anyone who doesn't pay minimum wage? That's pretty much everyone here. Okay, and who thinks that the RIBA should reconsider the curriculum in terms of Part 2 and Part 3?
And Part 1.
And Part 1? A few more hands up there then. And who thinks that the ARB should offer an alternative route to the current Part 3? Okay. Thanks very much.
I would like to thank everyone for coming, because we know you've all watched over from work. We've got more to go down apparently.
Paul's like already, Paul's halfway to the pub in his head. So, right. These are things that maybe schools and academia could take forward and, yeah, think about. So, the first point was about maybe diversifying the methods by which you could teach. So, like, by internet or things, you're not necessarily being taught in a very expensive central London building, and this would probably address or begin to tackle the issue of diversity and who could afford to study. And then second one is having more aspects of architectural education taught by or shared with other professions, so maybe engineering or digital media. And the other one was that the portfolio shouldn't necessarily count for 60% of the outcome of your student skills base, and maybe it should be more weighted towards writing or other things that we actually do in the job. So
I think there's also Robert's one, which is to do with flexibility.
Flexibility of study. Yeah, sorry. That was my favourite one, and I haven't written it up. Okay, so I'll just write that quickly. So that's flexibility in terms of methods of learning. So more part-time or apprenticeship-based. Okay, so show of hands for a more flexible system. Thank you. And using new media, for example, internet-based learning, to sort of address the rising costs of education and possibly increase.
Same thing.
Same thing.
Okay.
So I don't know, would you like to express that point? It's basically, to move away from being taught in really expensive buildings and try and reduce the cost of the education.
Well, I just think we need the whole way in which we diversify the way in which architectural education is delivered.
Okay.
Both in terms of time, in terms of place.
Oh, so this is the same thing as the flexibility of methods?
It's about moving from a kind of black and white you're in or you're out position to I think we put it in our thing saying you can be in for 7 days, 7 months, 7 hours, or 7 seconds, but you don't even need to be there. They're just points on a spectrum. Okay.
I think that was very popular anyway, so having more aspects of the education system taught by or shared with other professions. You're including this all. So, right, well, we've come to one conclusion. This is a different thing. Okay, well, there's two separate points there. Yeah. Okay, and then for students, I've got two different ones that I can point out for students as maybe suggesting to them that they need a stronger student voice and kind of, how that beginning to sort of think about how they're going to do that. I know that Luke Butcher in Manchester has been doing really great work, but that's such a small drop in the ocean in terms of the amount of architecture students there are. So the need for a stronger student voice, but also your very interesting suggestion that students, the onus should be on students to take their final thesis project forward on graduation as maybe a social enterprise project, similar to the way that business schools are run. So maybe a show of hands for these two. So who thinks that they need a stronger student voice? Interestingly, not everybody thinks that. Okay, and then, yeah, what about the idea about taking your final thesis project forward as a real project? Yeah. Okay. Well, I'd like to wrap up now, and we've reached some very interesting conclusions. And I'd like to thank all our speakers and ranters and suggesters, and thank you all very much for coming.
One final note, that's that Dawn's career will be not in use tonight, so you have to sign the chart on your way out. And feel free to write more comments on there, so the more we collect, the more we, I mean, this is the start of the collective